Okay, well, hello everybody. In this short video we're going to be looking at time, and we're going to cover some of the big ideas in teaching time in the primary school, and we're going to start by looking at the learning that's described within the E's and O's and the benchmark statements before moving on to some of the key teaching points. So our learning intention for this short video is very simple then. It's to understand the key teaching points within time and to see how these progress across the curricular levels. So what we're going to do for the next 3 slides is we're going to look at the E's and O's for each curricular level associated with time, as well as the benchmark statements. Now, I'm not going to read the next 3 slides for you, but rather what I suggest is that you pause the video on each of the 3 slides and take some time to look over these statements. Now, doing this will help you to develop your understanding of how these concepts progress. But I'd also suggest that you pay attention to the connections between these ideas as well, so you can see how we form these big ideas about time with our children rather than just a fact file set of bits of knowledge or facts. Well, that's not what we want children to have. We want them to have this big understanding and see these key connections, so it's important that you have that as a practitioner. Okay, so I'm going to pause on each slide to give you a couple of minutes just to read them through and think about the learning that's described. Okay, so that's early level. Here's first level. Again, I would recommend you pause the video. And second level. Okay, so now that you've had a good opportunity to look through those E's and O's and benchmark statements, you'll hopefully have a developed understanding of how these link together and you can see some progression through them. What we'll do now is we'll look at some of the big ideas that you're going to be touching on as you're teaching time. The first then is this idea of time interval versus recorded time. Now, time interval is very simple. It simply means the length of time occupied by an activity. And that can be measured in seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, years even. And it answers the question, well, how long did it take? It's a really interesting idea here because oftentimes if young children ask, well, how long is it going to take? It's normal for an adult to reply with a unit of measure like minutes. So an adult might reply to the child, well, it's going to take 20 minutes. To which young children can often reply, but how long is that? You see, children need to develop their inner sense of time as a measurement or quantity. And one of the ways that you can support them with this is by using informal or non-standard units of time. Now, in my house, when my children were young, this was Pingu episodes because my boys loved Pingu. But they had a sense of how long a Pingu episode was. It was 10 minutes. So they had that informal unit of time, that understanding of how long a Pingu episode was, how long 10 minutes was. Now, as educators, we want to provide lots of little and often opportunities to help children develop their inner sense of how long. And that's with the purpose of helping them develop their understanding of units of times. So it's not something that's out with, but something that they can have a good inner sense of. And there's lots of fun ways to do this. You might remember playing games like this in school or at Cubs or Brownies. A fun one is to ask children to close their eyes, tell them that you're going to give them a unit of time, and when they think that time's passed, they to put up their hand. This could be 10 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute. And again, it's a good way for the children to get that inner sense of how long this duration of time is. You can have the children estimating time. How long will it take us to tidy up and put the timer on? How long will it take us to do dinners and put the timer on? You can get them to see how many different activities they can do in set periods of time. Again, to see that 10 seconds is relatively short. How many times can you write your name in 10 seconds? But actually a minute of doing that can feel quite long. You also want to anchor time for children. So again, give them more of these units of time that they're familiar with. So for example, playtime is 20 minutes long. Lunchtime is an hour long. And again, it's just giving them more of these units that have a route that they're very familiar with to help them anchor that sense of time as an interval. Now, there's an interesting point here that you can discuss with the children, which I think they'll really enjoy, and that's actually about the relative nature of time. See, a 20-minute playtime might feel really short, whereas a 20-minute assembly might feel really long. And equally, 1 hour of playing their favourite game might fly by in what feels like 5 minutes, whereas 5 minutes in the dentist's chair might drag on and feel like an hour. So it's just an interesting discussion that you can have with the children. Now, the next thing you'd want to talk about then from time interval is recorded time. And recorded time is the time at which events occur. So the time of day, the day of the week, or the calendar day. And this answers the question, when did it happen? Now, nurseries and early level classrooms, especially primary one, but definitely still in the rest of those curricular levels, will often start their day, or have as part of their daily routine, looking at the calendar. Talking about what day is it today? What's the day of the week is it? What month are we in? And this is just a really lovely way to become more familiar with recorded time. It's an easy thing to do in your classrooms, to have a visual timetable or something like that, where you can be constantly revisiting these kind of things. You also want to encourage vocabulary names like the days, the months, the seasons, and using vocabulary like this helps children further understand recorded time. Time intervals versus recorded times, well, they aren't always separate. You can see from the example on the screen that both are actually present. The football match took place on the 3rd of March 2016 and lasted 90 minutes. So that's just an example for you of recorded time and time interval being used together. The next thing we've got to think about then is the sequential nature of time. Now, this is just thinking about the sequence or the pattern within time. So you'd start by looking at calendars and discovering the sequence and the pattern that we have. So children in the early years can really enjoy learning the days of the week to the tune of the Addams Family song, and you can see the link there for you on the screen. In older classes, you can encourage discussions by having months of the year as a display and adding special events or to each month, like birthdays or holidays or festivals. And it's these kind of little and often activities that help the children, again, become more familiar with the sequence and the nature of time. You can do little things like if you're waiting to go into the assembly or the dinner hall, you can have the children line up and you can practice going backwards and forward through the months of the year, or giving them 1 month of the year and say, well, which one would come next and which one would come before. And again, there are just lots of little strategies that you can use like this, little and often, to make sure children have a solid understanding of the sort of sequential nature of time. Okay. So when it actually comes to learning to tell the time then, children tend to move sequentially from the whole hour, so telling the time by the whole hour, to telling the time by half past the hour, and then introducing quarter past and quarter to. Now from this point, children then just become increasingly more accurate in terms of telling the time. Now in early inputs, we've discussed the importance of learning the forward and backwards number word sequence in order to help our pupils have a deeper understanding of the sequence and the pattern within our number system. And one of the ways that we look to do this is through counting choirs. What I would suggest actually is that the same approach can be used to help children develop their understanding in terms of the sequence and the pattern of time, using a counting choir in much the same way. So a tool I would suggest for using this is things like the teaching clock from Top Marks, and you can use this to practice saying the time word sequence as a class. So if I come out of this presentation quickly and show you this clock, you can see it here. Oh, my mouse battery has just died. So what you can see is we have the clock in place here. And we can say to the children, right, boys and girls, we're all going to start counting in 1 hour. So we're at 12 o'clock. Let's count in an hour. Ready? 12 o'clock. 1 o'clock. 2 o'clock. 3 o'clock. It's very slow, this clock. Or you can then move into counting by half an hour. So you could say 3 o'clock, 3:30 or 3:30, 4 o'clock. You could then do it in 50-minute intervals. So 4 o'clock, 4:15, 4:30. 4:45. So again, in the same way that you can practice using the forward and backwards number word sequence to help children become more familiar with our number system, you can also have counting choirs to practice telling the time to help children become more familiar with the sequence and the pattern that we have. And just like it's important to practice going forwards in our number word sequence as it is going backwards, we want to make sure that we're also practicing telling the time going in reverse for the children. So where we're getting earlier, we're moving backwards through the day. So we're taking away 15 minutes or taking away 30 minutes. Okay, so if we go back to our PowerPoint then. So from thinking to learning to tell the time then, the children are moving from the whole hour to half past to 1:45 and 1:15, and then increasingly more accurate. And we can use tools like the teaching clock to help them practice these different sequences. From here, we begin to teach children about using analog clocks and digital clocks. Now, normally we start with an analog clock, but it's worth noticing that children are becoming increasingly more unfamiliar with analog clocks as digital clocks become the standard in our society. It tends to be digital clocks that you see, or digital times that you tend to see, especially people with phones or digital watches. It's a digital time children are familiar with. A key input that we'd be working on with the children, once we have them familiar with these two different ways of representing time, is converting between the two, converting between analog and digital. A really nice, simple way that you can have this as part of your classroom culture is you can see the screen shot that I have here. This is just taken from an active primary board on an interactive whiteboard, and it's constantly displaying the time in both. So it can just be a a little and often activity you can have in your classroom where you're displaying the time in both, or you can choose and switch between the two. It's important that they learn to convert and move between two times. However, as I've said, it's worth being mindful that children may be more unfamiliar with analog time now. That's just something to be aware of. Another obstacle to be aware of then in terms of teaching time is the fact that now we go twice around the clock face. Not now rather, but on an analog clock we go twice around the clock face. And this can be confusing for children. Derek Haylock provides this diagram as an alternative way to begin talking about the day with children and the 24 hours with the day. So you can see we start at midnight, and then we have a section for each hour of the day, and then when we get to 12 noon, we don't go back to the start again in terms of a second rotation around the clock face, but rather we keep going through the 24 hours of our day. Now this can be really helpful for children because we can differentiate the difference between what's happening at the 5 a.m. and the 5 p.m. Whereas if we're just using an analog clock face, we've only got the 1-5. Where this is the first 5 o'clock of the day. You'd say, boys and girls, everyone would be in their bed apart from the postman. But at the 5 o'clock here, most people will be having their dinner. So children can become more familiar with that 5 a.m. and these morning activities by populating these different hours with the kind of events that they would be doing with the PM activities. As they become more familiar with this 12-hour then, you can start introducing the 24-hour time, and that would just be continuing the count. So where we get to 12 noon, instead of returning back to 1 again, we would continue the count and introduce 24-hour time to the children that way. There is something else that we should notice though about this, and that is that when children have finished this kind of learning, or as they're doing this kind of learning, they often then move into time calculations or calculations with durations of time. However, it's worth mentioning that with our durations of time, time isn't a base 10 number system, and as such children can easily make mistakes if they're not being careful. So here's an example of the type of question children might be asked to calculate with time. John studied for 2 hours and 50 minutes in the morning and 1 hour 50 minutes in the afternoon. Calculate the total amount of time that John spent studying. Now if a child isn't being careful, they might just put those two values, 2 hours 50 and 1 hours 50, into a standard algorithm, complete the calculation as if it was a base 10 number system, and come up with 4 hours. But we know that's incorrect. It's incorrect. A far easier way to perform this calculation is to teach the children how to use an empty number line. So let's have a look at that question again, but using an empty number line. So here's my empty number line here. The first thing I would do is I would have the children put the first time on that empty number line, so 2 hours 50. And now we're going to be adding on the 1 hours 50. So the easiest thing for me to do is just to add on 1 hour straight away, and that gets me to 3 hours 50. And that leaves me with the last 50 minutes that I need to add on. However, it's going to be easier for me just to add on 10 minutes, so to take that 50 minutes and break it into 40 minutes and a 10 minutes, because that's going to get me up to the round 4 hours, and then from there add on the last 40 minutes, 4 hours 40. The children can check that they've added on the right amount of time by totaling up these values here. So I've got 1 hour plus 10 minutes plus 40 minutes is 1 hour 50, and that's how much we had to add. Okay, so hopefully then that was a quick video, but a quick overview of the key teaching points within time and how to use these and how they progress across curriculum levels. Here is the references, and here are some further reading. The New Zealand website is very, very useful. And lastly, here are some resources mentioned within the video, resources that you can go on and use. Okay, thank you.